Overhand Follow Through. I've worked on this one a lot, and this should be the needs more sentence fragments. Thank you. I'm going to write that down. Armand, the most successful author I know, says it needs more sentence fragments. All right, got it. That'll be my note for the next edit. And I'm sure you wouldn't lead me astray. All right. Overhand Follow Through is a zombie story that I think is pretty good in its final draft form, and I'm going to read it now. Hopefully, I will find no more typos and will not have to stop in the middle of the story to fix yet another problem. But it is written by Jay Wilburn, and Jay Wilburn finds lots of typos. Okay. Overhand Follow Through by Jay Wilburn. Cobb Jolson wasn't the oldest man in his neighborhood when this week began, but he was on his way there now. One of Cobb's long-dead uncles told him as a kid that the fact is the number of people older than you always got smaller and smaller until you were at the top of the heap. That blew his mind back then. Cobb's wife Piper had just turned 80, and he was almost 9 years older than her. That week, the people older and younger than him were dropping like flies, and the heap kept getting higher. 15 Fairfax circles sitting at the bend of a cul-de-sac with fewer than 15 houses on it was their retirement home. It was too much house and too much yard for the two of them, even when kids and grandkids visited, but he hadn't worked his way up in life to have to wait on any bathrooms or to wonder where things should go. He had no need for an office, but there was a perfect place for it, so he had one. He had a media room with fine black recliners set up theater style, but he mostly watched TV in bed. He used to watch TV in bed until the zombies rose earlier that week and the power went out for good. No more TV in bed or in that pitch black media room. He might well have been the oldest man in the state by the time he was forced out the side door of his garage onto a small square of concrete pad. Cobb forced the door closed behind him, and when he felt it latch, he took a moment to catch his breath. That moment also allowed him to realize he was outside and exposed to the creatures eating people alive all through the world now. So much for all that square footage. He could probably get back in through the screened porch and separate sunroom if he remembered where the spare key was, but going back inside might be a terrible idea. The air stunk of carbon from dirty smoke. It was like the forest fires last summer where the nose-burning odor permeated the air for weeks. The fires irritating his nose today he could see though. Black smoke billowed up behind the forest in the direction of town. Two more blazes were within sight of his side yard. The property values of the Coldstream Heights subdivision were dropping fast. Buyer's market, he muttered and then coughed on the acidic air. Cobb used his elbow to stifle the noise because, of course, he wasn't the oldest man for miles for no reason. Zombies. Sentence fragment. Those walking dead things that belonged in kids' comics and trashy horror nonsense wandered the roads, the manicured lawns, and the green spaces no longer supported by HOA dues. At least that cost is off my plate, he said, muffled into the crook of his arm. His own lawn was in need of mowing and tending. Cobb prided himself on his yard space, even though he hadn't done any of the work himself for years. He had great succulents and squat palms and a rock bed filled with bright white, gray, and tan river stones that were almost too smooth, round, and perfect to be natural. They were, though. He'd paid plenty for that look. A flagpole missing its state and national flags stood bright and tall exactly where the HOA approved. He had, of course, not ventured outside to raise those flags since all this started. Seeing Quentin What's-His-Name and his young wife from a third or fourth marriage, Cobb couldn't remember, getting torn apart in the middle of their quiet side street was enough to convince him to stick with indoor living for a while. But here he was. All right. The street was still stained at the place of their deaths. She had gotten up again and wandered away. Quentin had not, but there was no signs of his remains now. Cobb didn't care to explore what that might mean. Cobb recognized some of the undead through their bloody masks of injuries, people he was friendly with, but he did not trust to be friendly now. Zombies, the ones in real life anyway, seemed to always go for faces and necks. Every new recruit was an awful mess. He did his best to stifle another cough, but some of the closer monsters heard him and turned in his direction. More picked up on the movement and joined in on closing the distance. Cobb was closed out of his garage, so he had to decide where he wanted to go from here. Almost on impulse, no real planning involved, he picked up one of the precious rounded river stones out of the immaculate bedding. There weren't many kids in this neighborhood, probably only a couple, but Cobb put a lot of time into shooing them away from his rocks. A good round rock was awfully tempting to a young boy. An entire landscaping feature of them had to be maddening. Oh no, I just realized that's not how that works. So I have to fix one thing. Maddening. There you go. Found a typo. An entire landscaping feature. Well, let me go and fix. No, I'm going to leave that. An entire landscaping feature of them had to be maddening. Cobb was far from boyhood, but he could recall that instinct just the same. Still, they needed to stay off his damn lawn, as far as he was concerned. As his grandchildren, all his grandchildren so far were girls. That was 3 so far, with a mystery 4th on the way. The younger of his 2 boys and his daughter-in-law wanted to keep the gender a surprise. Cobb thought gender reveal parties were nonsense, but there were plenty enough surprises in life without being surprised by what you were having. For example, surprise zombies. Piper had been super worried about the boys and their granddaughters. Surprise, no cell phone service and no calls going through on the landline either to check on them. Okay, that's a sentence fragment as well. It took all his energy to convince her they couldn't get in the car and cross over multiple states to check on them all in person with all this going on. That's a lot of alls. But surprise, it didn't matter anyway. He bounced the bright white stone in his hard-lined palm a couple times. This was a stupid plan. No plan at all, really, but he hurled the rock at the scattering of bodies headed toward him. Cobb felt something give in his shoulder with a warning twinge of pain. "You aren't young anymore, you old fool," that twinge said. The rock arced nicely. It spun with a deadly twirl that any curveball pitcher would envy, he thought. It bounced off the closest zombie's shoulder. Cobb would bet that shoulder was dislocated at least. The sound of the impact was quite satisfying, but even this old fool knew he needed to aim for the head and do more than dislocate. He held his back as he took up 2 more hefty stones. As the zombies mounted the curb and crossed his lawn at the farthest point of his lot, he connected with heads this time. One skull cracked for sure, and he crushed another nose into nothing, but he put none of the monsters down. No good. There's another sentence fragment. As he bent down to arm up in both hands again, he planned to make his way around the house and use the rocks as bludgeons if any of them got a hold of him. Cobb still had some bulk and strength even at this age, but he had personally seen groups of these things take down much younger and fitter men than him. As he stood up straight, he stared at the backs of his attackers retreating into the street. Not that he was complaining about them getting off his lawn, but he didn't get it. Some commotion and the ongoing lack of a plan kept Cobb planted on that little island of concrete. Ugh. You find one typo, you find a bunch. That's why I need good editors. Little island of concrete with a rock in each hand and eyes fixed on the wandering dead. It wasn't long before the 2 bicycles zipped through. One of the boys pointed at the lawn, and they both hopped the curb and tore through the grass at Cobb. Normally he'd yell his ever-loving head off for that offense, but his lawn was already losing its shine along with the rest of the world. Stepping off with the bike still rolling, the front wheels bounced off the siding and fell over on the edge of Cobb's rocks. Nolan Hemphill said, "Sorry about your lawn, Mr. Jolson." The other boy, Jordan Merrifield, added, "And the house. We were in a hurry, the zombies and all." Cobb wondered how much of an a-hole he had been that 2 boys fleeing a horde of zombies still felt like they needed to apologize for riding on the lawn. He'd developed a reputation, obviously. Cobb was far more concerned about the mob of creatures coming after them and him again. Looking at these boys and their sweaty panic made his mind go to his granddaughters, 2 of them past bike riding ages. I'm going to go ahead and see if that combines up. We'll make that hyphenated. Bike riding ages themselves, one just learning, and then, of course, a mystery baby on the way. He tried to leave it at that, but his thoughts added, likely to never be born at all, as a dark tag. Don't worry about it. Can you two throw? Nolan and Jordan accepted the rocks from Cobb's hands like they were being given some great honor. This was still a stupid plan, but Cobb was starting to think he might be in shock. The boys turned and hurled their stones. One struck a zombie's eye socket and staggered it. The creature regained its balance and kept coming. The other stone split a young undead woman's scalp right down the middle, and she twisted as she folded to the ground. Nolan cheered as Jordan groaned. You have to aim, Nolan said. Jordan held out his hands. I hit it in the head. Well, hit it harder. Nolan then looked up at Cobb. Can we get more rocks? Cobb glanced at the corner of his porch behind the house and then at the closed door behind him. He had no good options with more of those things coming. Yes, please, boys, knock yourselves out. Nolan passed a rock to his friend. We should knock them out instead. Hand me one too, son. Make it a good one. Both the boys dropped a zombie each on Cobb's unkempt grass. Jordan redeemed himself by splattering the brains of the one he'd failed to fell the first time. That first stone jammed in its eye socket, popped right out like a cork as it hit the ground. Cobb's throw went wide, and his shoulder gave him another stinging warning of his age. Try again, Mr. Jolson. Nolan passed out stones for another volley. Call me Cobb. It only seems fair with us fighting side by side. He eyed the creatures closing in. If they get too close, you boys get on your bikes and circle around the house to get away. Take the trail to the lake back there, and then keep going wherever you can. He left out the part where he would try to hold them off so the boys could get away. That might make up for all those years of yelling about his stupid lawn, or for failing his own family during this time of crisis. Again, that's a sentence fragment there. This truly might be his last stand. Hell of a world, wasn't it? Nolan was still paying attention to Cobb as Jordan downed a large undead man in some sort of uniform spoiled by old blood. He took up another stone on his own. Less talking, more braining, soldiers. Nolan took one out, too, and rearmed himself. Cobb considered his options. His shoulder did not have great range of motion. The boys seemed to be following some sort of sport training or primal instinct in their overhand throws. Cobb remembered skipping stones over water. He still did that on rare occasion on that lake back through the woods on let's stop stuttering. On days cool enough to not have mosquitoes. He wasn't sure it would work, but he flicked one sidearm and it curved right into the brow of an older undead woman, probably from this neighborhood, with a lot of exposed skull showing through her torn skin. The stone blasted through her head and kept going. It tore off the side of another zombie's head behind the first, and they both went down. Nolan passed another stone to Cobb. That was awesome. A double, Jordan added. Can you teach us how to do that? You're doing fine, boys. Don't change horses midstream. What? Just stick with what's already working for you, I mean. They continued their defensive assault from Cobb's side yard. The boys did try a couple sidearm flicks. The stones tore up the undead, but usually they missed the heads. The three of them each stuck with their prime techniques. The yard filled with bodies that stunk too terribly for the smoke to cover anymore. It would only get worse with time. The ones flowing from the street started to thin out, and the field of downed zombies slowed their progress across the lawn. The trio of unlikely warriors missed a few times, but not often. With the slower progress and wider spread of approaching trouble, they were able to alternate throws, rest, and take careful aim each time. Nolan juggled two stones from hand to hand as he awaited his next turn. Cobb, what are you planning to do? The old man glanced at the door behind him and said, I was thinking of running for it, but I don't know where. But I think I can take care of a problem inside that gave me trouble this afternoon. Then I can stay here a while longer, I guess. I have a good bit of non-perishable food. Keeping extra supplies on hand is an old habit from my mother in my youth. Cobb paused to make his throw. It was a little farther than he usually tried, but he'd rather take an extra throw than to let these things get any closer. The creature's skull and brains blasted apart into dozens of pieces from the direct hit to the temple. He started to suspect that zombies attacking the heads of their victims was weakening their skulls somehow. Nolan used one of his stones Nolan used one of his stones to take one down, still well into the street. They were all getting good at this. Maybe cocky was a better word for it, which could be dangerous, but it was a dangerous world no matter. Okay, I'm glad I read. A dangerous world now, no matter how you faced it. Okay, I did that right. I was just reading it wrong. All right. Cobb asked, "Where are your families?" Both kids looked at each other and then away. As they rearmed themselves, and Cobb, that seemed answer enough. But no one spoke anyway. It was bad. My dad tried to go for help and more supplies, but he got overwhelmed, and my uncle tried to help. My folks tried too, Jordan said. My mom. In that pause, Cobb considered that it was probably his job to put an arm around the boy, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. This was an era where you kept away from other people's kids. He knew both their families, good people for sure. Nolan gathered himself and spoke over a grunt of effort as he opened another zombie's head, some distance away. It wasn't his turn, but neither of them said anything about it. My mom is the only reason we got to our bikes and away. Cobb thought that was the sign of a true hero, making her last stand to let the boys get away for now. He felt a certain responsibility to make that motherly sacrifice matter. He hoped someone near his kids and grandkids might do likewise. Jordan took an extra turn, ridding the world of one more zombie. We tried to get out of the neighborhood, but we just kept drawing them in. You guys can stay here once I clean up something inside. Maybe we can come up with a plan together after something to eat and a little rest. The boys exchanged another look and nodded their agreeance. We should finish off these last few, Jordan suggested, and then they might not figure out we're inside. Just then a golf cart buzzed around the corner and ran up in Cobb's drive. Lydia Quirk, in her mid-70s, behind the wheel, called out, "You got a charger we can use?" Cobb glanced over his shoulder. "I'm in the garage, but I can't get to it just yet." Daisy Lockridge, next to Lydia, pushing 80, said, "Sorry for the trouble, but we have some friends behind us." As if on cue, the shoulder-to-shoulder pack of zombies moaned into view. The trio took up their rocks and started unloading before any of the monsters reached the grass. It was hard to miss with so many of them together. Cobb broke a sweat and took deep breaths as he pressed on with the mission. He didn't even notice the two ladies joining in until their stones started taking the undead heads right off their shoulders. How? Nolan asked, with more awe than he had shown Cobb's sidearm technique. Cobb was impressed too. Daisy went on decapitating the creatures one at a time as Lydia laughed and said, "Wreck ball." Cobb had no idea what they were talking about, something in their youth or something more recent. "That's amazing," Jordan said as he split another head just on the edge of the lawn. "Overhand and follow through," Daisy said. They even took time to show the boys what they meant. Neither of the younger men took off a head, but they added more power and accuracy. The dead thinned and then petered to quiet. The fires in sight had burned themselves down to blistered boards and cinders. Cobb held his knees and waited for his heart to catch back up. Daisy reached for the doorknob behind Cobb. He didn't even move to stop her. "I think it's locked. We'll need to go around, and I'll have to find where I hid the key from myself." The knob did turn, though, and the door burst open as a figure plunged through and slammed into Cobb's back. He let out a strangled cry as he tried to twist away. He ended up on his back, with the undead body on him snapping her teeth. He would feel that fall if he survived until morning. He was lucky he didn't break a hip. Maybe not mowing your lawn had some advantages. Lydia let out a breathless word. "Piper?" Cobb held his wife's throat to keep her teeth, still her own unfortunately, away from his face. But his arms shook with the day's rock throwing. The boys wrestled her off sideways and pinned her to the ruined grass beside Cobb. Nolan lifted a rock over his head and hers. "Mr. Jolson, we have to, okay?" Cobb nodded, but then said, "I should do it." He struggled to get to his feet again as the boys held down Piper. Then, before he could gain his feet, she broke free of their grasp. He reached for them to pull the boys away instead of going for her or protecting himself. Two stones whistled through the air and connected with a sharp clack inside his wife's brains. Her head and face lost their shape. He was thankful she landed face down after it was over. He felt bad he hadn't handled that instead of running away outside. But what would the boys have done then? Maybe it all worked together for the good, like Piper always said, before she tried to kill him. Lydia said, "I'm very sorry, Cobb." No, he shook his head and turned away. "Thank you. I should have handled it myself, but it was just a scratch. I didn't even know if it was one. It was from one of them. I just waited too long and then got caught out here with all of them. Not your fault," Daisy said. "Yeah, we're all doing the best we can," Nolan said. Cobb swallowed a few times. Okay, hold on. Since I'm already fixing things anyway, I want to add in something. He considered that he should bury her, and he vowed to do it later. Although it would turn out that he would choose to break that vow for practical reasons. He considered that he should bury her, and he vowed to do it later, although it would turn out he would choose to break that vow for practical reasons. Let's say ultimately. He would ultimately choose to break that vow for practical reasons. All right. This turned into less of a reading and more of a second edit, I guess. Third edit, actually. All right. Cobb swallowed a few times on a dry throat. "Well, everyone come in. We can clean up and eat and rest." "We're going to keep going," Lydia said, "if we can get that charger." "It's getting late." Cobb made a point of looking to the sky. "There are people we need to check on," Daisy said. Those words would haunt him in the days to come. They did take tea and clean up inside as the charger worked on the cart outside. Everyone went out together and stood near the rocks until they knew it was clear. Cobb let the ladies keep the charger, and they promised to come back if they found help. Cobb thanked them, but doubted he'd ever see them again. The boys stayed with him a while. He worked on their bikes a bit and found them comfortable places to sleep. His hip, back, and shoulder took longer to heal up than even he expected. He spent that time trying to think of a way to cross 3 states in two different directions to check on his family. Was there a way to do it without either abandoning these 2 boys or dragging them on a windmill tilting quest through deadly zombie country? The solution to this puzzle eluded him, haunted him. There are people we need to check on. Ending all those zombies was a good thing for many reasons, but eventually the stink of rot was too much for towels under doors to keep out any longer. You could get used to bad smells in time, but they were always there. It was like being trapped inside a fresh tomb. In the end, they did come up with a plan. It was a shame they couldn't bring the great rocks with them, but they did set out together, and they did quite well for themselves, all things considered.